The room was already pulsing with tension when Pam Bondi leaned forward, voice sharpened to a point, and launched an accusation that sliced straight through the air. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't measured. It was the kind of blunt political swing designed to rattle, to overwhelm, to knock the opponent off balance before they even had a chance to breathe. For a moment, you could almost hear the collective inhale of everyone watching. Cameras zoomed in. Staffers stiffened. Even the lights overhead felt like they were holding their breath. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't fire back. She didn't even shift in her seat. Instead, she lifted her head with a slow, deliberate calm that felt almost impossible in a moment like this. Her eyes met Bondi's, steady and unshaken, as if she had been preparing for this exact attack long before it arrived. The silence between them grew heavier, charged with something electric, something unexpected. People in the room leaned forward without even realizing it, sensing the shift. Bondi kept staring, waiting for a scramble, a defensive stumble, anything to confirm she'd landed her hit. But Crockett's stillness said otherwise. That stillness was its own language, its own warning. It wasn't retreat. It was precision. It was confidence. It was the unmistakable calm of someone who refuses to let noise define the truth. Then Crockett spoke. Just one line. One perfectly measured sentence that cut cleaner than any insult, any accusation, any attempt at political theater. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The strength of it came from somewhere deeper, clarity, dignity, and the kind of moral gravity that doesn't need raised voices to be heard. The effect was instant. Bondi blinked. Her jaw shifted just slightly, almost imperceptibly, but the cameras caught it. The room caught it. Everyone caught it. That single moment, sharp, precise, undeniable, hit harder than any fiery monologue could have. The energy shifted so drastically that even Crockett's quiet exhale felt like part of the impact. And for the first time since the exchange began, Bondi didn't have a comeback. No keep. No pivot. Nothing. Silence wrapped around the table. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that crackles. The kind that signals something bigger is starting to unfold. But no one in that room, not even Crockett's closest supporters, expected what happened next. Long before that single sentence stunned the room, the stage for this clash had been building piece by piece, shaped by a country wrestling with its own identity. America was standing at a crossroads again, one defined not just by political rivalries, but by deeper questions about who gets to speak, who gets to belong, and who gets to define the truth in the public arena. Every debate, every exchange, every televised confrontation had become more than policy differences. They were mirrors reflecting the divides running through millions of households. That was why this moment between Jasmine Crockett and Pam Bondi carried a weight far beyond the table they shared. They weren't just two political figures sparring. They were symbols, contrasting, clashing, representing entirely different visions of what leadership should mean in a changing nation. Pam Bondi came in with the confidence of someone who had spent years moving comfortably through the old architecture of American power. Her style was familiar, forceful, confrontational, rooted in an era where volume often substituted for clarity. She represented a school of politics that relied on intimidating presence, dramatic accusations, and the assumption that whoever spoke the loudest would define the narrative. For many viewers, Bondi embodied an old guard approach, one shaped by institutional privilege and certainty that the status quo belonged to those who already held the megaphone. But Jasmine Crockett represented something entirely different, something newer, younger, louder in spirit even when she spoke softly. Her presence alone was a statement. She stood for rising generational power, for communities that had fought their way into rooms that were never built for them, for voters who believed dignity was not a weakness but a form of resistance. Crockett didn't need theatrics to be heard. She carried the weight of lived experience, the edge of a civil rights attorney who'd stood beside people the system often overlooked, and the quiet fire of someone who had learned early that calmness can cut deeper than chaos. Millions of Americans saw themselves in that contrast. For some, it was a battle between past and future. For others, it was identity versus erasure. And for many, it was simply the rare moment when truth refused to bow to bluster. That was why the room felt different that day. It wasn't just political theater. It was a test a test of whether the new American voice, confident but grounded, could stand toe-to-toe with the entrenched force of old politics. Every viewer watching from home felt the stakes. You could feel it in the way social media buzzed before the exchange even went viral. People weren't just waiting for a debate. They were waiting to see if someone like them, someone who carried their fears and their hopes, could hold their ground without losing their soul. This clash mattered because it wasn't built on cheap drama. It was built on the tension between two versions of America meeting face to face. One trying to preserve authority through pressure, the other asserting presence through poise. One leaning on past power, the other speaking from lived reality. Their confrontation captured a truth that resonated far outside that room. That dignity, when wielded with confidence, is its own kind of strength. And yet, none of them knew that the clash was about to explode. Pam Bondi's rise didn't happen quietly. It unfolded with the unmistakable force of someone who entered public life determined not just to be heard, but to dominate every room she stepped into. From the moment she emerged on the national scene, she embraced a prosecutorial style shaped by years of courtroom combat, sharp, aggressive, and designed to corner opponents before they had the chance to gather their thoughts. For her supporters, this was strength. For her critics, it was spectacle. But either way, it ensured that Pam Bondi stood out. She built a media persona around this intensity. Television studios quickly became alternate courtrooms where she acted as judge, attorney, and sometimes even jury, delivering pointed commentary with the confidence of someone accustomed to having the last word. She had that practiced look, the narrowed eyes, the precise head tilt, the calculated pause before launching into a line crafted to ignite evening news panels. She knew how to use tone as a weapon, volume as a spotlight, and certainty as a shield. In an era where confrontation often overshadowed nuance, Bondi mastered the art of sounding unshakable. But behind that confidence lay a pattern, one that viewers began to recognize over time. Bondi's rhetorical style relied heavily on striking first. She often framed her arguments like cross-examinations, asserting dominance early and forcing her opponents into defensive positions. It wasn't just strategy, it was habit. The rhythm became predictable. Open strong, apply pressure, escalate fast, and assume that the sheer force of her delivery would carry the narrative. For years it worked. Many political figures faced her bluntness and stumbled, unsure how to respond when the conversation turned into a verbal ambush. Along the way, her public presence attracted its share of controversy. Not about secret scandals or hidden truths, but about her approach. Her tendency to lean into confrontation with little regard for how the moment might be perceived outside her immediate circle. Critics noted that she sometimes prioritized bold soundbites over careful context. Supporters applauded her readiness to say what others wouldn't. That divide followed her everywhere she went. It marked her speeches, her TV interviews, her political commentary, and every debate where she thrived on being the unfiltered voice of old guard certainty. In many ways, Bondi symbolized a specific model of American politics, the kind built on unyielding posture, and the belief that authority must be asserted, not earned. She projected unwavering confidence, even when the situation called for nuance. She favored sweeping accusations over measured questioning. She treated high-pressure rooms like they were her home court, expecting opponents to buckle under her intensity. Her loyalty to this style wasn't incidental. It was the core of her public identity. And yet, as the political landscape shifted, the cracks in that approach began to show. A new generation of leaders was rising. Leaders who didn't mistake composure for weakness, who understood the power of precision over volume, who refused to let intimidation define their choices. They weren't interested in theatrics. They were fluent in substance. They spoke for communities who had grown tired of being talked over and dismissed. Their presence challenged the old momentum Bondi had long relied on. Still, Bondi remained convinced that her trademark intensity would always win the moment. She entered debates expecting opponents to falter. She delivered accusations certain that they would go unanswered. She believed that if she applied enough pressure early, the other side would eventually break. It was a pattern reinforced by years of watching adversaries retreat under her verbal barrage. But what she didn't account for was how dramatically the stage had changed. The audiences watching weren't merely entertained by confrontation. They were analyzing it. Communities who'd been sidelined before were now keenly aware of who wielded their voice responsibly and who treated the public stage like an arena. Viewers were no longer impressed by loudness alone. They were looking for authenticity, clarity, and a sense of fairness that didn't rely on verbal force. Bondi's confidence, once her greatest asset, now felt like a mismatch in rooms where people wanted answers, not theatrics. Her certainty, once a signal of decisiveness, increasingly read as refusal to adapt. And her tendency to strike first, explain later, no longer landed with the same impact it once did. The culture had moved toward valuing leaders who could balance passion with precision, heat with humanity. Still, Bondi walked into that confrontation with Jasmine Crockett, convinced her old formula would hold. She assumed Crockett would respond like so many others, defensive, flustered, scrambling to keep up. She believed the power dynamics she'd grown accustomed to would tilt the same way they always had. But this time, she picked the wrong opponent. Jasmine Crockett's story didn't begin in the halls of Congress or inside polished studios where political battles echo across the nation. It began in a world far quieter, shaped by struggle, grit, and a deep sense of responsibility long before she had a title in front of her name. She grew up understanding what it meant to fight for space, not through aggression, but through persistence. In her home, dignity wasn't an abstract ideal, it was survival. Her childhood taught her that the world didn't always open its doors for people who looked like her, so she learned to build her own path with resilience as her foundation. Even then, she carried a sense of composure that would later become her signature, the kind of calmness people rarely associate with power until they witness it firsthand. As she got older, the challenges she faced didn't fade, they sharpened her. She watched people in her community navigate systems that weren't designed for them. She saw families fight battles no child should have to see. She witnessed how easily a person's voice could be dismissed simply because of where they came from, what they looked like, or how much money they didn't have. Those early experiences didn't break her. They forged her resolve. Jasmine realized she didn't want to just survive those injustices. She wanted to confront them. That clarity pushed her toward education with an intensity that surprised even the adults around her. She wasn't chasing prestige. She was chasing purpose. Law school became the next chapter, but even there the road wasn't smooth. She dealt with professors who underestimated her, peers who doubted her, and institutions that tried to mold her into something quieter, smaller, more palatable. But Jasmine knew shrinking herself would only replicate the patterns she had grown up fighting against. Instead, she sharpened her mind. She trained her voice. She learned the power of asking precise questions, of dissecting arguments with accuracy rather than anger. Every late-night study session, and every difficult class, strengthened the quiet confidence that would one day stop Pam Bondi in her tracks. She wasn't preparing to win debates. She was preparing to stand up for people who had been ignored for too long. By the time she became a civil rights attorney, Jasmine had learned to channel both her fire and her patience with surgical precision. In courtrooms across her state, she represented people who had no one else. She fought for the wrongly accused, the overlooked, the families who couldn't afford a lawyer but deserved justice anyway. These weren't symbolic fights for her. They were personal. She spent hours listening to stories of pain, of frustration, of systematic barriers that others preferred not to see. Every case taught her something new about the world and something deeper about herself. She wasn't the kind of lawyer who chased headlines. She chased fairness, even when it meant standing alone. In those tense courtrooms, she developed the quiet, controlled power that would become her trademark. Judges noticed it. Opposing counsels noticed it. She didn't raise her voice to win a point. She sharpened her clarity. She didn't rely on theatrics. She relied on truth. When others tried to provoke her for advantage, she remained steady, letting silence speak where anger would have been expected. It wasn't passivity. It was strategy, an understanding that calmness can be more disarming than any outburst. She learned that measured words, delivered with certainty, could unravel even the most aggressive opponent. What she lacked in volume, she replaced with undeniable presence. As her reputation grew, so did the communities that trusted her. People saw her as someone who didn't just promise change, she embodied it. She attended rallies not for photos, but for people. She walked into neighborhoods overlooked by local officials and listened deeply. She understood that leadership wasn't about commanding a room. It was about earning it. And because she had lived the realities many were still navigating, her advocacy resonated with authenticity. She didn't perform empathy. She lived it. That emotional depth created a connection with voters that no amount of campaign funding could manufacture. They didn't just support her, they believed in her. When she transitioned from legal battles to the political arena, she carried the same grounded discipline with her. In hearings and interviews, she rarely reacted to provocation, because she understood the power of choosing her moments. Her brilliance wasn't in flashy one-liners. It was in her ability to strike with precision after patiently listening to every word. Observers often noted that she let her opponents build their own contradictions, only to dismantle them with a single, incisive response. The louder they got, the calmer she became. The more chaotic the environment, the more focused she appeared. People began calling it her calm but deadly style, a blend of grace and steel that felt especially rare in today's political landscape. Central to her philosophy was a simple belief. She didn't need to raise her voice, because she raised the standard. She represented a generation tired of being shouted over, a community long denied the respect it deserved, and a nation yearning for leaders who embodied strength without cruelty. Every public appearance, every debate, every interview reflected that larger mission. It wasn't a performance. It was who she had always been, someone who believed dignity was its own kind of armor. So when Pam Bondi confronted her with that aggressive old-guard certainty, Jasmine didn't feel pressured to match her volume or her theatrics. She reached instead for the lessons forged over years of struggle, advocacy, and relentless clarity. She reached for the composure that had carried her through far harsher battles than a televised confrontation. She reached for the truth she had built her entire life upon. And those lessons? They were about to collide with Pam Bondi's most aggressive attack yet. There are moments in political hearings when the air itself seems to tighten, when conversations stop being exchanges and start becoming collisions. This was one of those moments. A hearing that had begun with routine procedural statements had quietly swelled into something else. A duel of presence, patience, and performance. And everyone in the room could feel it coming long before it arrived. Pam Bondi had entered the chamber with the unmistakable stride of someone ready for combat. Shoulders squared, jaw set, eyes lit with the sharp glint of someone who believed victory was already pre-written. She had spoken with the familiar cadence her supporters applauded. Quick, loud, confident, almost daring anyone to challenge her logic. She clasped her binder like a prop, flipping pages with theatrical timing, each turn signaling another planned strike. Her voice, rising and falling in abrupt spikes, cut through the room like a serrated edge. Jasmine Crockett, by contrast, sat in almost stoic quiet. Her posture was straight but relaxed, her elbows resting gently on the desk, her hands folded in front of her. She wasn't uninterested. She wasn't unprepared. She was simply unmoved. It was the kind of calm that didn't demand attention, it commanded it. While the noise swelled around her, her eyes remained steady, focused but not fixed. Listening, but not absorbing the chaos. Observing but not reacting. As Bondi launched her opening volley, the energy in the room shifted. She spoke over others. She tightened her voice. She gestured wildly, her fingers slicing the air as if sheer hand movement could turn flimsy arguments into unbreakable ones. Her interruptions grew bolder. Her accusations grew broader. Her tone grew louder. "Let me finish," she snapped repeatedly, even when no one else was speaking. But Crockett didn't flinch. Not once. To the audience watching from behind, it looked almost unreal, like a controlled experiment in human temperament. Bondi, fueled by adrenaline and expectation, pressed forward with increasing intensity. Crockett, grounded in an entirely different frequency, refused to rise to that pitch. Her face remained composed, almost serene, her expression revealing nothing except intentional restraint. If Bondi brought sparks, Crockett brought water, still deep and unshaken. Then came the moment everyone would later point to as the ignition. Bondi interrupted again, sharply, aggressively, cutting off a procedural note as though it were a personal insult. The room reacted in small, scattered gasps. Even a few panelists shifted in their seats. The staffers in the back exchanged glances. Something had crossed an invisible line. Crockett slowly lifted her eyes. Not abruptly. Not defensively. Not with anger. Just a simple, deliberate look. Quiet as a whisper, sharp as a blade. And that alone made the room fall still. Bondi, sensing she had scored a point, pushed harder. Her voice tilted upward, each sentence delivered like a challenge hurled into a ring. She leaned forward, pointing, insisting, over-explaining. Her words overlapped with themselves. Her breath raced ahead of her logic. For the first time, the confidence in her tone wavered, just slightly, but enough for those paying attention to notice. Crockett tilted her head, studying Bondi the way a surgeon studies an X-ray before making the first incision. Her hands remained folded. Her shoulders didn't move. She blinked slowly once, as if giving Bondi time to walk herself deeper into rhetorical trouble. It wasn't indifference, it was calculation. She was letting the moment build. She was letting Bondi reveal the full arc of her own frustration. Because Crockett understood something Bondi didn't. You don't have to raise your volume when you're about to raise the standard. The tension in the hearing chamber grew thick, almost physical. You could see it in the stiffening posture of the representatives beside them. You could hear it in the low murmurs from the gallery. You could feel it in the subtle, rhythmic tapping of pens against the desk, an unconscious response to stress unfolding at the center of the room. Bondi stood taller in her chair, chin lifted, eyes narrowed. She delivered another accusation, something sweeping and rehearsed, her voice straining to sound authoritative while betraying a hint of desperation underneath. The more she pushed, the more Crockett's stillness seemed to unsettle her. It was a battle Bondi didn't realize she was losing. Not because of facts, but because of presence. Crockett finally inhaled, deep, slow, controlled. The long-awaited exhale sent a ripple of anticipation through the room. Staffers paused mid-keystroke. Cameras adjusted their focus. Even Bondi seemed to sense something shift. Crockett uncrossed her hands. She leaned forward. Her eyes locked onto Bondi with quiet precision. And in that single movement, everything changed. Cliffhanger. Then Crockett leaned forward, and everything changed. There are takedowns that echo. And then there are takedowns that resonate. Passing from ear to screen to timeline, until they become a moment. What Jasmine Crockett delivered in that hearing didn't just silence a room. It rewrote its atmosphere. It shifted the oxygen. It turned a chaotic exchange into a masterclass. This wasn't a clash of personalities. It was a collision of preparation versus bluster, discipline versus theatrics, calm precision versus reactive noise. And it began quietly. Almost too quietly. After the long, charged silence that followed Crockett leaning forward, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't even clear her throat. She simply placed one hand lightly against the table, grounding herself, and spoke in a tone so soft it forced everyone to listen. "Ms. Bondi," she began, each syllable crisp and deliberate. "I'm going to walk you through this slowly because it seems the details are slipping." A subtle wave of reaction passed through the panel. Sharp exhales, barely muffled chuckles, the sound of someone's pen freezing mid-air. Crockett wasn't just responding, she was framing, establishing tone, setting rules. With that single sentence, she claimed the space Bondi had been thrashing against moments earlier. Bondi blinked, once, twice, realizing a shift she hadn't anticipated. Her shoulders straightened, her lips tightened. She opened her mouth slightly as if to interrupt, but Crockett continued without adjusting her rhythm. "You've made several claims," Crockett said, turning a page in front of her with clinical calm, so calm it almost mocked Bondi's earlier theatrics. "But they don't align with the facts you yourself brought into this room." A soft gasp fluttered through the gallery. The tempo was set. Crockett spoke slowly, not dragging, but pacing with precision. She laid out each point the way an attorney constructs an opening argument. Fact, contradiction, clarification. Her voice never wavered. She wasn't lecturing. She was guiding the room through a maze Bondi had built without an exit. "First," Crockett said, lifting her eyes but not her volume, "you misquoted the timeline." She tapped a line on the document before her. "You cited this as your evidence, but if you actually read it." She paused, Not for effect, but for accuracy. The room leaned in. It says the opposite. A ripple of quiet astonishment rolled through the audience. Bondi inhaled sharply. Her jaw twitched. Her fingers gripped her binder just a little too tightly. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She never even looked away from her notes. She simply kept going, building her argument one steady brick at a time. Second, she continued, her voice smooth as polished steel. You keep insisting on a point we've already clarified. Twice. Her eyes lifted. Repeating a thing doesn't make it true. It only makes it louder. The whisper of stifled laughter bubbled from a few seats behind her. This was where the dynamic shifted fully. Crockett was no longer defending. She was diagnosing, unpacking the rhetorical techniques Bondi attempted to weaponize. Bondi tried to interject. A quick breath, a raised finger. But Crockett didn't stop. Not rudely. Not aggressively. Just firmly. I'll yield when I'm done correcting the record, Crockett said, still in calm tone. Not when you decide you're uncomfortable with the correction. That line hung in the air, electric. Someone whispered, "Oh wow." Another whispered, "She's done." Bondi's face shifted. Confidence sliding into confusion. Confusion melting into irritation. She tried to muster her earlier volume. But something had broken in her delivery. The force wasn't landing. The audience wasn't absorbing it. Her timing was off, her pacing uneven. Crockett, meanwhile, operated like a conductor guiding an orchestra no one else realized they were playing in. Her hands stayed still. Her tone stayed level. Her logic tightened. She exposed contradictions Bondi had glossed over, line by line, point by point. She didn't embellish, didn't exaggerate. She simply aligned Bondi's own statements side by side, until the contradictions revealed themselves. It was factual. It was disciplined. It was devastating. Crockett wasn't attacking Bondi personally. She was dismantling the architecture of her argument. And she was doing it with the exact same calm Bondi had mistaken for passivity. Now, Crockett said, adjusting one page. Let's address the claim you repeated the loudest. The room tightened again. The reason you raised your voice wasn't because you were confident. It was because you were cornered by your own statements. A low rolled through the audience, half affirmation, half awe. Bondi's eyes widened. She lifted her chin, inhaling as if preparing to strike. But Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned in even closer, her voice dipping to a calm, razor-thin whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. Facts don't get intimidated, she said. But apparently, some people do. This time the reaction wasn't a whisper. It was a wave. Gasps. A muffled, "Oh no she didn't." Even a staffer in the corner, known for stone-faced neutrality, covered their mouth. Bondi tried to speak. Truly tried. Her lips parted, a small sound escaped. And then nothing. The words simply wouldn't form. It wasn't that she had nothing to say. It was that nothing she could say would match what had just happened. Crockett waited. Eyes steady. Silent. Composed. Bondi blinked hard, searching her notes, flipping a page, then another, fingers shaking just slightly. The confidence she had carried into the room had evaporated. Her voice had lost its footing. Every attempt to recover seemed to collapse under its own weight. Crockett didn't press further. She didn't need to. She had built the crescendo, delivered the strike, and left the silence to do the rest. Then came the moment. The exact moment viewers would replay, screenshot, meme, quote, and circulate across every platform. Crockett folded her hands again. She paused. And then she delivered the line. A line not shouted, not dramatized, not snarled, but spoken with the unshakable certainty of someone who understands the power of precision. "If you're going to come for me," she said, eyes locked on Bondi, "come prepared." Loud isn't the same as right. The room erupted. Not chaotically, but in a stunned chorus of disbelief. A few people exhaled sharply. Others froze, eyes widening. Some looked at Bondi with a mix of sympathy and second-hand embarrassment. And Bondi, her face fell silent. Her expression deflated, shoulders sinking, eyes lowering, lips tightening in the unmistakable look of someone realizing the tide had turned, and she had nothing left to throw back. The hearing chamber wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It wasn't theatrical. It was quiet. Deeply, profoundly quiet. Because everyone knew they had just witnessed a decisive moment. On social media, even though the clip hadn't yet hit the internet, you could almost imagine the comments as if they were appearing in real time. Crockett just ended her without raising her voice. This is how you fact-check in real time. She came at her reckless and left speechless. I felt that through the screen and it hasn't even aired yet. Somebody get Pam a reboot. Her software crashed mid-hearing. Jasmine Crockett didn't clap back, she calculated back. But inside the chamber, the power of the moment was even sharper. In the end, it wasn't about winning a debate. It was about reminding the country that composure, courage, and dignity always outlast noise, aggression, and spectacle. And that lesson, timeless, universal, and inspiring, was the real victory. You just witnessed it. You won't believe what Jasmine Crockett just did to Pam Bondi. And yet, it wasn't about shocking a single person in the room. It was about showing the country what happens when preparation, courage, and dignity meet arrogance and spectacle. From the first pause to the final line, Crockett didn't just respond. She embodied a principle, a standard, a way of leading that refuses to bow to intimidation. If you felt your heart race, your jaw drop, or your spirit lift while watching that exchange, you're not alone. Millions of Americans were glued to the screens, sharing the same mix of awe and inspiration. People who've ever been talked over, underestimated, or sidelined felt a little lighter, a little louder, and a lot more seen. This wasn't just political theater. It was a reminder that calm conviction and truth carry power far beyond any heated argument. And this moment doesn't end here. It's bigger than one debate. It's bigger than one headline. It's a call to all of us, to engage, to speak, to stand with dignity, to elevate discourse, and to never underestimate the quiet force of preparation and principle. If you felt that energy, that inspiration, that fire to do better and be better, then be part of it. Comment below with what stood out to you. Share this with someone who needs to see how calm can conquer chaos. And subscribe not just for updates, but to be part of a community that celebrates courage, integrity, and leadership in action. Because moments like this aren't just for watching, they're for living. And together, we make sure dignity always wins.